Greetings, folks. John Grace, President, Investors Advantage, and the Money Doctor is in. Today, we're going to look at the economy, primarily from the perspective of the midterm elections, because a lot of people are asking, what does that mean? And what did we see? A huge sea change. We're going to see a whole lot more red ties in Washington because everyone's outraged and we just have to fix this, right? And yet, we also find that it was only, 36.4% of the electorate cast their ballots, so not that much outrage. In fact, it ranks real low to about 1942, just about the time that we were entering World War II, when it was about 33.9% of eligible voters who bothered to go vote. But we want to look at the economy from a way that it might make sense to you. And by the way, we are one of the few financial advisors since 1999 that has been paying up to $10,000 a year for independent research. It helps us see the big picture so that people can get a sense that maybe it's not such a random walk on Wall Street. Maybe there are some ways to read the economy and so that we can get a sense for what do we need to do and why are we taking the action that we might be taking. So let's look at it from the standpoint of spending, because in the world as we know it, it's all about the spending. And the U.S. happens to be numero uno in the most volume of spending, about $16.8 trillion in the world. China's number 2 at about $9.2 billion, by the way. So when we look at the total amount of spending, let's look at where does that spending come from. The good news, there's only 3 groups. We've got the government, we've got businesses, and we have the consumer. So now the question becomes, which group should we watch the most closely? Because a lot of people believe it's the government that dictates everything. Well, if we rank those 3 groups, if you will, or dogs. I like to say, if you had 3 dogs in your backyard, which one would you watch the closest? Probably the one that does the most damage or could hurt the most people, correct? And when we look at government spending, it is about 10% of the total. Business is about 20% of the total. And the consumer is about 70% of the total. It's one of the few things that economists agree to, okay? So when we see the consumer stands as the biggest and the baddest dog, we want to look at a couple of things. First, what's their behavior? Are they saving more than they're spending? Or are they spending more than they're saving? If they're saving more than they're spending, then that's probably not a good thing for the economy. Certainly it's hard-pressed for businesses to sell a lot of goods and services. If they're spending more than they're saving, whether it's with cash or credit, that's good for all of the markets. It's certainly good for businesses and it makes people feel good. But we are entering in a different environment than we've seen in the last 70 years, because now, for the first time, you have those 76 million people, the boomers, from 1946 to 1964, which puts Michelle Obama at 50 and George W. Bush at 68, who are really entering the 60s and the 70s, or the sunset years, if you will. That's a very different paradigm shift, far more powerful than any change in Washington. And when we look at, like, the last 2 presidential elections, you stayed up late to watch the results, right? And what did you really need to do? Go to sleep right after the Ohio polls closed, because that told you everything in terms of how the other states were going to line up. Now, I've never been to Ohio, and my mother's from Ohio. You probably will never get to Ohio. But you see, Ohio represents the average, and it's the average that we need to be paying the closest attention to. So when we look at the average, we find that peak spending happens and peak earning happens between about age 46 and age 50. That group peaked in number in this country in 2007. Now, the top or the bottom 50% probably represent just 1% of all the assets in 2013. And when we look at the top 5%, the wealthiest people in this country, they controlled about 63 of all assets in 2013. So clearly the group that has peaked in spending, that's passed for the average, and then for the wealthiest people, that group happens to peak in 2014 at age 53. So you tell me, what does this look like for the future? I'll tell you what we see when people reach age 54, 55, 56. It's like a waterfall in terms of spending. So we're suggesting that we look at the average folks, not the folks we know, not the wealthy people, not the educated people, not the Koch brothers, not the coastal states. They did not move the needle. The Homer Simpsons of the world did. With Bart at 25, your need for spending is a fraction of what it was when Bart was 10 to 15 and maybe through high school and college. So we're going to suggest that you might be managing today, and that 45% of about 2,000 Americans surveyed just in September do not believe that their financial situation will rebound in their lifetime. That's a lot of people for a very long time. So this would be the time for you to look at your situation, get your house in order, because if it is the case that a global depression is going to happen sometime soon, you want to be as ready as you possibly can be. And with that, I'm John Grace, and the Money Doctor is out.